Hi there, Michelle here from McQuaid TV. We're helping you find ways to move from functioning to flourishing by putting the latest science to the real-world test. Today, I'm very honoured to be able to introduce you to Dr. Ryan Niemiec. Ryan is the Education Director of the VIA Institute on Character, a global non-profit positive psychology organisation that educates people about the latest science and practice of character strengths. Ryan is a licensed psychologist, coach, international presenter, and is adjunct professor at Xavier University in Cincinnati. He's the author of Mindfulness and Character Strengths, A Practical Guide to Flourishing, and co-author of a few other books, including Positive Psychology at the Movies and Movies and Mental Illness. Welcome, Ryan.
Well, thank you, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always great to reconnect with you and to touch base.
Ryan, I'm so pleased you made the time to be with us today because one of the questions I often get asked when I'm out presenting workshops on how we flourish at work is just exactly what is a strength and why are they a benefit to us in the workplace. So can you help us with an answer to that?
Oh, I could give it a shot. Yeah. You're kind of getting at a key point here of that there are many different kinds of strengths. And if you were to ask a group of 100 people who are in the field of positive psychology, do you consider yourself to be strength-based? Probably most of them would say, yes, we are, but we would probably all define strengths a little bit different. You might receive 100 different definitions. And so there isn't really one official definition, but from the lingo of our conversation around the science of character and character strengths, we really see these character strengths defined kind of along the lines of that they're capacities within us, capacities for thinking, feeling, and behaving in ways that can bring benefit to ourselves and others. So it's usually some kind of thinking like that. And, I also explain that these character strengths are positive traits within us. They're positive parts of our personality that we can learn to grow and develop and improve, even though they're quite stable over time. So our highest strengths are likely to be our highest strengths 5 years from now. And yeah, it is really growing in popularity, especially in the last 5 to 10 years in the workplace. People are quite used to the Gallup strengths and some of the Gallup lingo, and so VIA has been able to capitalize on some of that energy, and really people are finding it very useful working in executive coaching and human resource work and managerial work and so on. And people are learning that this is really just a universal language. These character strengths are universal language that apply personally in our family relationships and very much in the workplace as well.
Why do you think we struggle so much to name what our strengths are? I know I often ask people in workshops, can you name your top 5 strengths? And they might get kind of 2 or 3 out, but trying to come up with 5 strengths is actually really hard for us. So why, you mentioned, how helpful VIA often is as a vocabulary for people to start to be able to name their strengths, but why do we struggle so much to name what our strengths are?
Yeah, there's this deep level of strengths blindness, I think. It sounds like a harsh word, a harsh phrase, but just an underuse and unawareness of strengths. Where at most cultures, at least that I've traveled to, seem to have such a strong negativity bias, so accustomed to looking down on oneself or seeing what's wrong. The judging parts of our minds are so strong, so we're much more accustomed to looking at problems and then maybe trying to overcome them, or maybe sometimes we ruminate or wallow in them, and not as accustomed to really applying the same kind of mental rigor to what's best in us and really practicing doing lots of thinking and reflecting and discussions, linking it to our past, linking it to future possibilities with our best qualities, with these core characteristics, these core character strengths. So I think it's just we're out of practice. Because when I find that when people are given the opportunity, like you give people in your workshops and books, and like I do, when you give people opportunities to learn about their character strengths, they are able to do it, and they're able to kind of get more savvy with it and play around with it. Sometimes they might need a little push in the beginning, moving around a little bits of confusion, but so I think we just need that little push to get beyond that initial strength blindness that we all have. Now, a side comment about strength blindness, my view of it is that I'll always have strength blindness. Like I'll always have some level of blindness in terms of applying the strengths in some nuanced context or situation. And so I think it's important to be humble about that, that we're never going to be fully, perfectly, you know, expert awareness of all of our way that we combine our strengths and use them across contexts. But at the same time, we all have a pervasive kind of minimal level of strength blindness going on too. So I don't know if that kind of gets at some of it. It's a pretty strong question. We could probably talk for an hour on just your question.
Most definitely. And I have to say, I've also found the more I've learned about my strengths, the less I realise I always understand my strengths, as you're mentioning, in different situations. And I think that's a richness that once you've completed a tool like the VIA survey, we're all interested in what we look like at our best, and there's that initial moment of, but then there comes the real question about what do I do with it? And I know increasingly the research in recent years and the work that VIA has been involved in has sort of looked at that view of, rather than just using our strengths, how do we develop our strengths? And how do we get them, to your point, right in different situations? Because we can't apply one strength the same way every situation, be like trying to use a hammer to fix everything in your house. So can you help us understand, how do we develop strengths so that we find we're getting them just right more of the time than not?
Yeah, sure. And I think you got it right. It takes time. It takes personal work, and it develops over time. I would I tend to use this model, the strengths model called the Aware, Explore, Apply model. So after we develop some kind of general awareness, that's that first phase of breaking through some initial strength blindness. We take the VIA survey. Maybe someone asks us a poignant question about our strengths. So we're breaking through some of that awareness, starting to connect. We're starting to connect with some of these qualities in us. Then the next phase that people often skip is the explore phase. And so this is where it really is an ongoing process, like you were saying, where we keep learning, we keep digging, we engage in conversations, we engage in reflections. We really try to make a conscious, mindful effort to be aware of our strength, all in the nuances throughout the day. So we might target one or two of our highest strengths, and really with the intention of, I'm going to expand my thinking about this. I'm not going to just sort of take it for granted and assume I know everything about my creativity or my curiosity or my gratitude. I'm going to really explore it deeply and expand how I think about it and really apply it into my daily life, because we're really always using our strengths. We're just not always aware that we're using them. They're always there. We might not be using them at an optimal level, but they're kind of there for the observing, for the noticing, for the use. So I think that really helps with the development, is that exploration piece. And that might take, it's really for the rest of our life, but that phase could take a while. And then the third phase of that Aware, Explore, Apply model is apply. And that's where we then set some goals around the strength. We take action in some kind of way. The common example of for the apply phase is to link this in with the research on signature strength. So the idea is to use one signature strength in a new way each day in our life. And so that might be an example of what one person might do in that apply phase of the model. So they take their curiosity or they take their fairness and they use it in some new way each day. And research shows that is linked with all sorts of good things. Higher levels of happiness for 6 months, lower levels of depression for 6 months, greater work engagement, more positive experiences at work, more meaning at work, more work as a calling, more work productivity, all sorts of good things when we're using our signature strengths. So that could be an apply phase component. And then you just kind of keep recycling. Then after you apply and you're working with one, you go back, do some more awareness, exploration, apply, and it's kind of a continuous process. So
I think one of the things that helped me, particularly in that exploration stage, was coming to understand you could have too much of a strength, and particularly that awareness of the shadow side of my strengths, and how often when I looked at feedback that I'd been given at work about areas of improvement that I had, it was often a shadow side of my strength in play. So can you talk to us a little bit about what are shadow sides to our strengths, and why can we have too much of a good thing?
Sure, sure, yeah, yeah. To set that up, I usually think of the each of the 24 character strengths on a continuum, and so like there's this kind of optimal level or strength zone or the golden mean of strengths, whatever we might want to call it. And then on one side we can underuse our strengths. We're just not bringing forth enough. It's strength blindness, that whole thing. And then the other side is kind of what you're saying, kind of more of the darker side, the shadow side, the overuse component. And that occurs when we're really, well, it occurs in many ways, but one way it can occur is because we're so passionate and excited about these qualities within us and these signature strengths that we just bring it forth too strongly, and then it begins to affect our relationships or whatever it might be. I'm high in the strength of hope. And one way that I can overuse this strength is because hope is so much about being able to come up with many different goals and many different pathways to the goals. And so because I'm so excited about hope and it just comes out of me naturally, I can create too many goals and too many pathways, and then end up feeling overwhelmed, agree to too many things. And then suddenly it's like, I can't do any of them at a really optimal level because I've taken on too many tasks or just too many books to write or articles to write or whatever. And so that's kind of that hope of I can see where all these possibilities can link to a better future for me or my family or somebody else, and I want to say yes to all of them, but it ends up being too much. So that's kind of the shadow side for my hope strength. And you could play that exact example out with any of the 24. And people do. People usually look, especially at their signature strengths, their highest 5 to 7 strengths, those that they most resonate with, and then look at, okay, how can each one of these turn into a darker side, or how can I overuse them, and when does it might cause problems for me? So it's very, very provocative and fascinating topic for people to dive into.
I think that helps illuminate it a lot. And I know in workshops, when I ask that question, have your strengths ever gotten you into trouble? Initially, there's a lot of shaking of heads, except for the people who are high in the strength of honesty, of course. And they always have an example of where they've been too honest and too blunt with someone. And then the people with the strength of humour start to put their hand up about where they've made the joke at the wrong time. And then slowly you see the people with the strengths of love and kindness put their hands up of where they're giving and giving and giving to everybody else until they're burnt out themselves. So I think understanding our shadow sides is such an important part of that exploration. But another big aha I had in that exploration stage was understanding sometimes in my most challenging relationships at work how my strengths were colliding with somebody else's. So can you help us understand a little bit about strengths collisions and how that might impact us at work?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Same kind of concept with overuse in the sense that any of the strengths could potentially collide with one another. It could be that there's somebody that's really high in creativity and then another person that's really high in prudence. And that person with creativity at work is always trying to come up with more ideas, more ideas. They're thinking outside the box, new projects, new ways to move forward. Hey, let's do this routine in a little bit of a different way, kind of a creative way. And then the person with prudence is kind of thinking, I'm very planned. Prudent people are very planful, goal oriented, conscientious. They enjoy the routines. They're very good at achieving short term and long term goals, and so they might feel a bit affronted by the creativity person, the person that's trying to bring that forth. So those two strengths, each of those person's highest strengths could really collide in that sense and get in each other's way. I mean, sometimes strengths collisions can happen within ourselves. Like the honesty example, it's like, do I be honest with this feedback to this person, or do I make sure I bring a little bit of kindness to it, and so they can collide? But then that last example is how two different people with strengths can butt heads too. Really, yeah, really interesting. And if those two people are aware of it and can bring that to the forefront of their minds and have an open dialogue about it, then they can come up with solutions around it.
And over me, I had that exact situation. I had a boss high in prudence and I was high in creativity, and I couldn't figure out, it was just, I hated those meetings. And once I figured out she was high in prudence, it gave me almost a bridge of empathy, if you like. It took the personal sting out, that she wasn't being a stick in the mud to try and annoy me. She was actually playing to what she did best, which was to keep the project on track, make sure we weren't taking unnecessary risks and delivering. And so once I understood that, it was much easier for me to respect and value her strengths. We didn't become best friends or anything, but I could appreciate what she brought rather than just seeing it as an obstacle to be overcome. So I always now, whenever I'm struggling in a relationship with someone, I try and look for their strengths so that I can try and think about where might we be colliding. And it makes a massive difference, I find. Ryan, you mentioned earlier in the interview that more and more organisations are starting to take a strength-based approach. But what if our companies aren't quite there yet? If our bosses don't quite understand yet the value of strengths and our job descriptions aren't designed around them, how do you suggest people go about using their strengths more at work in that kind of environment?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think you've described the vast majority of companies in the sense that most companies aren't strength-based, and so that means that there's always work for you and me and many other people to help them become strength-based. But yeah, but yeah, people are still using their strengths. So then it really comes down to a bit of intrinsic motivation for the person to really be motivated to apply their strengths, to be thinking about this. They might set up like a strength buddy with somebody else at work to kind of as somebody to bounce the ideas off with, for each to take the VIA survey and discuss top strengths, give each other feedback about strengths. So it really then becomes up to the individual to really make sure that they're bringing their strengths to work, that they're aligning it with their tasks at work, that they're kind of walking the talk. And who knows what kind of influence that can be. If they're walking the talk, that can influence many other employees, other people. And of course, we can't underestimate the power of that employee that's really intrigued by VIA and by character strengths to have that conversation with their boss and maybe do some strength spotting in the boss and give the boss feedback about their highest strengths and how that employee appreciates that employer. Ask the boss to take the VIA survey, bring ideas to the boss and say, hey, me and to a couple other employees would really like to bring strengths more to the organization. Could we do a presentation? Could we do a character strengths 360 exercise where we all spot each other's strengths? Could we bring in an outside person, and kind of brainstorm like that? And yeah, lots of possibilities. So the key is really to take action and don't let that stop you because most people are in the same boat as you, that most organizations don't take an explicit strength-based approach. They might try to think of themselves as positive, but they don't necessarily, systematically weave character strengths throughout the company. So.
And that's what I think the vocabulary of just knowing those 24 character strengths can be so helpful as well. I know when I worked in a large auditing firm where there was not a lot of strength spotting anywhere, there was a lot of weakness finding because that's, of course, what they've got paid to do so well. But when I started, first playing with the VIA and saying to my boss, well, you know what, my strengths are really curiosity and creativity, so how could we work those into more of my goals? I didn't have to educate him on the whole depth of strength-based approaches or even the VIA character survey. Just giving him the language to be able to start knowing what my strengths were really helped him maybe think differently about some of the assignments he was giving me. And when he would give me feedback, again, their tendency was to give us a lot of weakness-fixing feedback. And so I'd let that all kind of roll out and then I'd say, that's great, I'm taking that on board, I'll think about ways to address it, but can you also tell me what are the things I've been doing well? And just by asking a few of those questions, as you're suggesting, maybe having another strengths buddy, just starting to seed it, it's amazing how quickly people's curiosity starts to spark up about, well, what are these strengths things? What are you going on about? And why do you keep asking these questions? So small changes I found with this can make a big difference. What would be your one tip? So for people sitting out there watching this, maybe not knowing what their strengths are or wondering how to get started, what's the best way to start?
Yeah. Well, kind of the obvious thing for me to say would be to go to the VIA survey site, viacharacter.org, and take the VIA survey. And, it's because that starts the process of kind of looking at the language and beginning to kind of connect these universal qualities with ourselves and with who we are. But otherwise, I would say start simply and choose one of the 24 strengths that maybe you're most intrigued by. It might be your signature strength. It might be a lower strength. Whatever you're most intrigued by, and begin that exploration process. and maybe set up some kind of system each day where you are able to check in with yourself on that strength. Maybe you set a little beeping alarm or a beeping watch or something on your iPhone that's some kind of reminder. And every time you hear that little beep, maybe it's once an hour, every half an hour, you ask yourself about that strength that you're intrigued by. You ask about that fairness or that leadership strength or that gratitude or hope or spirituality, whatever it is. And you think about it. Could I be using this strength a little bit more right now in this task that I'm doing? Is there a way I could apply it in a way? Is there maybe I could journal about ways I could think about it more? Should I make a phone call that would relate to it? And so just kind of that step of I'm just going to start with one and just try to expand it a little bit, wherever it is in my profile, and then kind of see where that takes you and see what happens with your mood and see what happens with your productivity and engagement, and then kind of and then expand on from there.
It sounds like a great mindfulness activity to get your strengths working. Ryan, thank you so much for your time today.
It was a pleasure to connect with you, Michelle. Yeah.
The best way to start developing your strengths at work is to head on over to viame.org and take the free 10-minute survey to figure out what your top character strengths actually are. I also highly recommend Ryan's most recent book, Mindfulness and Character Strengths, A Practical Guide to Flourishing. And if you're looking for more practical, tested and playful ways to move from functioning to flourishing at work, be sure to stop by michellemcquaid.com, leave your name and email address so you can hear all our news first. We have a wonderful new online course starting shortly that will give you a strengths development blueprint if you're looking for a little more help to get started. Remember, you are good enough, so don't be afraid to let your light shine. Until next time, take care.